Everyone saw her as just the black maid polishing silverware at the lavish wedding, a shadow in the background, a person meant to be invisible. The bride, dripping in diamonds and entitlement, saw her as something less than that. She mocked her accent, a soft musical lilt that held generations of history, and laughed in her face in front of hundreds of perfectly curated guests. But what none of them knew, what the laughing bride couldn't possibly imagine, was the secret power hidden behind that simple maid's uniform. She wasn't a maid at all, but a billionaire fashion designer, a titan of industry who owned half the couture dresses shimmering in that very room. And by the end of that night, the same bride who humiliated her for sport would be on her knees, begging for forgiveness, not in private, but in front of the entire city, with every camera flashing. Before we find out what happens next, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button, because what happens next will shock you. The air at the Reynolds-Carter wedding was thick with the scent of money. It smelled of imported white roses, expensive champagne, and the kind of generational wealth that was both effortless and suffocating. The event unfolded across a sprawling, manicured lawn overlooking the Boston Harbor, a fantasy of white silk and twinkling fairy lights. This was the union of Madison Carter and Chase Reynolds, two names that appeared more often in financial reports than in gossip columns, a merger of empires disguised as a celebration of love. Guests, a sea of pastel silks and dark, tailored suits, moved with a practiced grace, their laughter light and brittle. In the middle of this perfectly staged world, a woman in a simple, crisp maid's uniform moved with a quiet purpose. Her name was Aaliyah Brooks. She arranged the heavy silver cutlery at the bridal table, her movements precise and economical. She was a ghost at the feast, a functional object, her presence acknowledged only when something was needed. To most of the guests, she was invisible, part of the scenery, like the towering floral arrangements or the string quartet playing softly in the background. She kept her head down, her focus on the task at hand, but her eyes missed nothing. She saw the forced smiles, the calculating glances, the subtle power plays happening over glasses of sparkling wine. Aaliyah was arranging a set of dessert forks when Madison Carter, the bride herself, drifted over, followed by a giggling trio of bridesmaids. Madison was a vision in a gown that cost more than a suburban house, a cascade of lace and hand-sewn pearls. But the beauty of the dress could not hide the ugliness in her eyes. Her face was flushed, not from joy, but from the free-flowing champagne she'd been sipping since noon. She watched Aaliyah for a moment, a slow, condescending smile spreading across her lips. "Excuse me," Madison said, her voice loud enough to carry. Aaliyah looked up, her expression calm, her gaze direct. "Can you speak English?" Madison asked, her tone dripping with disdain. One of the bridesmaids snickered. Aaliyah's brow furrowed slightly. "Yes, ma'am, I can." Her voice was soft but clear, with a gentle rolling cadence that spoke of her southern roots. Madison threw her head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that cut through the pleasant murmur of the party. "Oh, listen to that poor little maid accent. It's almost adorable, in a pathetic sort of way." The bridesmaids joined in, their laughter like a flock of cruel birds. Guests nearby turned to look. The polite conversations faltered. Aaliyah remained still, her hands resting on the pristine white tablecloth. She felt the eyes on her, the mix of pity, discomfort, and amusement. She felt the sting of the words, a familiar ache she had learned to wall off long ago. Madison leaned in, her champagne-laced breath washing over Aaliyah. "Just so we're clear, you are background furniture. You exist to fill glasses and pick up trash. When the photographer comes by, you are to stay out of the photos. Do you understand?" Aaliyah's gaze did not waver. It was unsettlingly calm, and for a brief moment a flicker of uncertainty crossed Madison's face. But it was quickly replaced by another wave of arrogance. "You're lucky to even touch a table like this," Madison added, gesturing at the elaborate setup. Most people like you only see places like this on television. The band, sensing the rising tension, paused mid-song. A pocket of silence fell over the immediate area. A junior event planner, a young man named Liam Turner, stood a few feet away, his clipboard held tight in his hand. He winced, a knot of revulsion tightening in his stomach. He saw the calculated cruelty, the way Madison was performing for her friends, using this woman as a prop to inflate her own importance. Liam's mind screamed at him to say something, to intervene, but fear held him in place. He was new. This was the biggest event of his career. The Carters were powerful. He said nothing. The humiliation was total, public, and deliberate. Madison, satisfied with her performance, smirked and turned to walk away, her bridesmaids trailing after her like loyal vultures. She had asserted her dominance, reminded everyone of the pecking order. But as she left, Aaliyah's voice, no more than a whisper, followed her. It was not angry. It was not defeated. It was a simple, chilling statement of fact. We'll see. The words were so quiet that only those closest, including Liam, heard them. They hung in the air, a promise of something to come. Aaliyah then returned to her work, her hands steady as she perfectly aligned the last silver fork, as if nothing had happened at all. The incident at the bridal table was just the beginning. Madison Carter, fueled by a potent mix of champagne and a lifetime of unchecked privilege, was not finished. She spotted Aaliyah a few minutes later, quietly collecting empty glasses from a side table, her presence a persistent, quiet reproach to Madison's grand display. The sight of the maid, so composed after being so thoroughly belittled, ignited a fresh spark of fury in the bride. It was as if Aaliyah's dignity was a personal insult. "You again?" Madison's voice was sharp, cutting through the renewed chatter of the party. "I thought I made myself clear. The help is to remain unseen." She strode toward Aaliyah, her expensive gown swishing aggressively with each step. Her husband, Chase, a man whose spine seemed to be made of gelatin, hurried after her. "Maddie, honey, let's just calm down," he murmured, reaching for her arm. She snatched it away. "Don't you Maddie me, Chase. This is my day, my wedding, and I will not have it ruined by the hired help lurking around every corner." She turned her venom back on Aaliyah. "What is your name?" Aaliyah met her gaze. "It doesn't matter, ma'am." This response, so devoid of the fear or deference Madison expected, seemed to enrage her further. "It doesn't matter? Of course it doesn't. You're just a uniform." She snapped her fingers and pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the main entrance. "Security!" she yelled, her voice now a shrill command that silenced the entire reception. Two large men in dark suits immediately moved toward her. Guests froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. All eyes were on the bride, the maid, and the impending explosion. "This woman," Madison said, gesturing dramatically at Aaliyah, "is trespassing. I want her out of here, now." The security guards looked confused. One of them glanced at Liam, the junior planner, who was standing nearby, his face pale. "Ma'am, she's on the catering staff list," one guard said uncertainly. "I don't care what list she's on," Madison shrieked. "I am the bride. This is my venue, and I am telling you to throw her out. Maids don't belong near billionaires." The word billionaires hung in the air, a vulgar assertion of her own importance. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This was no longer a minor spat. It was a public spectacle of cruelty. Chase tried again, his voice a weak whisper. "Madison, please. People are watching." She rounded on him, her eyes blazing. "Let them watch. Let them see what happens when people forget their place. It's my wedding, and I don't want the help ruining my pictures." Her words were a slap in the face not just to Aaliyah, but to every waiter, bartender, and busboy working the event. Liam felt a wave of nausea. He saw the other staff members stiffen, their faces becoming impassive masks to hide their anger and humiliation. The security guards, left with no choice but to obey the client, moved toward Aaliyah. One of them spoke in a low, apologetic tone. "Ma'am, you have to come with us." Aaliyah did not resist. She simply placed the glasses she was holding onto nearby tray, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She gave a single brief nod. As the guards began to escort her toward the long, winding path that led to the exit, Madison couldn't resist a final parting shot. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted after Aaliyah's retreating back, "Run along before someone mistakes you for a guest." A fresh wave of laughter, this one more strained and uncomfortable than the last, echoed across the lawn. Aaliyah walked with her head held high, her back straight. She didn't look back. She passed the rows of stunned guests, their faces a blur of curiosity and disapproval. Liam watched her go, his heart pounding with a mixture of shame and anger. He had done nothing. He had stood by and watched a good person be utterly degraded. As Aaliyah stepped past the grand iron gates and onto the quiet, tree-lined street, the cool evening air was a welcome relief from the toxic atmosphere of the party. The sounds of the string quartet and forced laughter faded behind her. She was alone. She reached into the pocket of her simple black uniform and pulled out a sleek, modern smartphone. It buzzed almost immediately, a silent, vibrating pulse against her palm. She answered it. "Are we still on schedule?" a calm, professional voice asked on the other end. It was her chief of staff. Aaliyah's own voice, when she replied, held none of the meekness of the maid she had just portrayed. It was steady, firm, and resonant with authority. "Yes," she said, her eyes looking back toward the twinkling lights of the party. "Everything is proceeding exactly as I anticipated." A small, determined smile touched her lips. "Bring the board to the venue in 2 hours, and call legal. Tell them to prepare the termination clauses." The maid who was just thrown out of paradise was no maid at all, and her quiet, methodical plan, years in the making, was now in motion. Hours earlier, before the sun had reached its zenith, Aaliyah Brooks had arrived at the venue not in a chauffeured limousine, but in a modest sedan, wearing an outfit that was purposefully nondescript. She had slipped in through a service entrance, her credentials identifying her as temporary staff from a third-party catering company. It was all part of a carefully constructed illusion, a disguise she had chosen with deliberate intent. To the world, Aaliyah Brooks was a name synonymous with power, elegance, and unparalleled success in the world of high fashion. She was the founder, CEO, and sole owner of Brooks Atelier, a luxury fashion empire valued at an astonishing $3.4 billion. Her brand was a global phenomenon, her couture gowns gracing red carpets from Hollywood to Milan. Her name was whispered with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. But on this day, she was not Aaliyah Brooks, the billionaire titan. She was just a maid, a ghost in the machine of someone else's opulent celebration. The reason for this elaborate deception was deeply personal, rooted in a pain that had simmered for over 2 decades. It began with her mother, a woman of incredible strength and quiet dignity, who had once worked as a housekeeper in the Carter family estate. Aaliyah remembered the stories, told not with bitterness, but with a weary sadness. She remembered her mother coming home late, her feet swollen, her spirit bruised, after a long day of scrubbing floors and polishing silver for people who barely acknowledged her existence. The defining moment, the one that had been seared into Aaliyah's memory, came when her mother was unjustly accused of stealing a small, insignificant piece of jewelry by Madison's father, the formidable Charles Carter. He hadn't just fired her. He had humiliated her in front of the entire household staff, calling her a thief and a liar, refusing to listen to her quiet pleas of innocence. The missing trinket was found a day later, misplaced by a young, careless Madison. There was no apology, no retraction. Her mother was simply discarded, her reputation tarnished, her spirit crushed. Aaliyah, then a teenager with fire in her heart, had vowed that day that she would never be powerless. She would build a world for herself, an empire so vast and influential that no one could ever dismiss her or her family again. and she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She had built Brooks' atelier from a small studio in her garage into a global powerhouse. So, when the wedding invitation arrived, it felt like a twist of fate. Madison Carter, the daughter of the man who had broken her mother's spirit, was getting married, and ironically she had chosen a Brooks Atelier gown, a breathtaking custom-designed masterpiece that cost $60,000. Aaliyah had personally overseen the final touches on the dress. She could have sent a representative. She could have declined the invitation. But she saw an opportunity, not for petty revenge, but for a profound and necessary lesson. She wanted to see if the apple had fallen far from the tree. She wanted to know if Madison Carter had inherited her father's cruel arrogance. So she devised a plan. She would attend the wedding, not as the celebrated designer she was, but as a member of the catering staff. She wanted to see how Madison treated the people she believed were beneath her, the invisible hands that made her perfect day possible. The apron was a test. The maid's uniform was a crucible. And Madison had failed spectacularly. Every sneer, every insult, every laugh at her expense had been a confirmation of Aaliyah's darkest suspicions. The cruelty was not just inherited. It had been perfected. As she had stood there enduring the public humiliation, Aaliyah had not felt anger in the way most people would. Instead, she felt a cold, resolute clarity. This was no longer just about her mother's pain. It was about a sickness of the soul, a rot of entitlement that she now had the power to expose. The plan had been simple: observe. But now, it had evolved. It was time to act. Her decision to go undercover was not just about exposing Madison. It was a tribute to her mother. It was a way of honoring the quiet dignity of every person who works in the shadows, every person who is treated as background furniture. She was there to remind the world, and specifically the Carters, that the person polishing the silver might just be the one who owns the entire estate. Back inside the glittering bubble of the wedding, Liam Turner couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in his bones. The image of Aaliyah being escorted out, her back straight and her head held high, was burned into his mind. Madison's cruel, triumphant laughter echoed in his ears. He was an event planner, and his job was to ensure things ran smoothly, to put out fires, to make the client happy. He had seen his share of demanding brides and difficult guests, but this was different. This wasn't a complaint about the temperature of the soup or the choice of music. This was a deliberate act of public degradation. It was ugly, targeted, and it made his stomach churn. He replayed the scene over and over, Aaliyah's calm, unnerving stare. It wasn't the look of a defeated woman. It was something else, something he couldn't quite place. It was a look of patience, as if she were merely waiting for the right moment. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. His career was just starting. The company he worked for, Evermore Events, was one of the most prestigious in Boston. Landing the Reynolds-Carter wedding was a huge coup for him. His boss had been explicit. The client is always right. Keep your head down, do your job, and never ever make waves. Speaking up would be career suicide. Madison Carter could have him fired with a single phone call. He could be blacklisted, his dream of becoming a top-tier event planner dissolving before it even began. He looked over at Madison, now holding court by the champagne fountain, retelling the story of putting the maid in her place to a fresh audience of fawning friends. She was preening, basking in the attention, completely oblivious to the moral ugliness of her actions. That's when Liam's fear began to curdle into a quiet, simmering anger. This wasn't right. No job was worth sacrificing your own sense of decency for. He thought of his own mother, who had worked 2 jobs as a waitress to put him through college. He imagined someone speaking to her the way Madison had spoken to Aaliyah, and a protective fire ignited within him. He had to do something. But what? A direct confrontation was pointless. It would only get him fired and achieve nothing. He needed to be smarter. He needed evidence. An idea began to form in his mind. He quietly excused himself and made his way to the small security office set up in a tent near the service entrance. The guards were there, looking uncomfortable. Liam approached the one who had escorted Aaliyah out. "Hey," Liam said, keeping his voice low. "That was intense out there." The guard, a burly man named Frank, sighed heavily. "You're telling me I hate stuff like that. The bride's a real piece of work." Liam nodded, feigning simple curiosity. "I just want to make sure my report is accurate. The incident happened right by the bridal table around 7:15, right? Camera 3 would have caught the whole thing, I assume?" Frank nodded. "Yeah, camera 3 and 4. Got it all in high def." "Good, good," Liam said, making a note on his clipboard. "Just for our records." He paused, then looked at Frank directly. "Could you do me a favor? Could you save a copy of that footage from the last half hour? Just in case there are any formal complaints filed. I want to make sure my company has all the facts." It was a plausible request, couched in corporate responsibility. Frank, who clearly felt guilty about his role in the affair, was happy to oblige. "No problem, kid. I'll put it on a thumb drive for you." While the footage was being copied, Liam's mind raced. What else? Witnesses. He walked back toward the reception area, his eyes scanning the catering staff. He saw the same quiet anger he felt reflected in their faces. He approached a young waitress he had spoken to earlier. "Did you see what happened with that woman?" he asked her quietly. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I saw all of it. It was disgusting. Would you be willing to write down what you saw? Anonymously, if you want. I just think there should be a record of it." The waitress didn't hesitate. "I'll do it, and I'll put my name on it." Over the next 20 minutes, Liam discreetly collected 3 more written statements from staff members who had witnessed the humiliation. He now had video evidence and multiple witness testimonies. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do with it. He didn't know if this story would end tonight. But as he tucked the thumb drive and the folded-up statements into his inner jacket pocket, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him. He had chosen a side. He had chosen integrity over job security. Whatever happened next, he knew he had done the right thing. And he had a strange, powerful feeling that the story of the quiet maid was far from over. Meanwhile, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the gates of her perfect wedding, Madison Reynolds, née Carter, was in her element. The humiliation of the maid had been the appetizer, and now she was feasting on the main course, the adoration and attention of Boston's high society. She floated through the reception, a glass of champagne permanently attached to her hand, her laughter echoing a little too loudly. She was the queen of her own little kingdom, and she was reveling in her power. She found her bridesmaids clustered near the towering 7-tiered wedding cake. "Can you believe the nerve of that woman?" she said, launching back into her favorite topic of the evening. "Just standing there staring at me, as if she had any right." "You totally put her in her place, Maddie," one of them gushed, a blonde named Tiffany who had perfected the art of sycophancy. "It was epic." "I know, right?" Madison said with a triumphant smile. "Some people just need to be reminded of the natural order of things. People like her are always trying to sneak into rich spaces, hoping some of it will rub off on them. It's just pathetic." Her husband, Chase, joined the group, his smile looking more like a pained grimace. He had been trying to steer conversations away from the incident all evening, with little success. He knew Madison's temper. He had seen it flare up over trivial things, a cold steak, a delayed flight, a poorly parked car. But this public display of cruelty had unsettled him. It wasn't just a temper tantrum. It was a deep-seated ugliness he usually tried to ignore. "Maybe we should let it go, Maddie," he suggested gently, placing a hand on her arm. She shrugged it off, annoyed. "Why? It was a highlight of the night. It's important to have standards. My father always said you can judge a person's character by the company they keep, and I refuse to keep company with the help." The irony of her words was completely lost on her. Not everyone was so enthralled. Throughout the reception, guests murmured in hushed tones. The older, more established families, those with old money sensibilities, found the display distasteful. Utterly classless, one dowager whispered to her husband over a plate of hors d'oeuvres. Charles Carter's daughter through and through. All of the money, none of the grace. Younger guests, more attuned to the social dynamics of the modern world, were already discreetly tapping out messages on their phones. "You will not believe what just happened at the Carter wedding," one text read. The story was already starting to leak, a small crack in the perfect facade of the event. But Madison was blind to all of it. Her world was a fortress built of wealth and privilege, and from her vantage point, she was untouchable. She grabbed a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter, not bothering to thank him. "I'll probably be on the cover of Society Bride next month," she announced to her friends, her voice slurring slightly. "Do you think they'll ask me about this? I could give them a quote about maintaining the elegance of an event." She laughed at her own joke. "Honestly, who cares about a maid? No one will even remember her by tomorrow." She was wrong. No one would remember the maid. They would remember the bride, and they would remember her for all the wrong reasons. Her arrogance was a thick, blinding fog, preventing her from seeing the cliff edge she was gleefully dancing upon. She was so consumed by her own reflection, so confident in her position at the top of the social ladder, that she couldn't feel the rungs beginning to crack beneath her feet. The storm was no longer just building. It was about to break. The interior of the black Mercedes Maybach was silent, a stark contrast to the noisy celebration Aaliyah had just left behind. The windows were tinted, turning the outside world into a muted, distant film. Aaliyah sat in the plush leather seat, the simple maid's uniform now feeling like a costume she was ready to shed. She had slipped it off, revealing a perfectly tailored black pantsuit she had been wearing underneath. The transformation was immediate and profound. The quiet, subservient maid was gone. In her place sat Aaliyah Brooks, the CEO, the visionary, the woman in command. She smoothed down the sharp crease in her trousers, her mind already shifting from observation to execution. The data had been collected. The hypothesis was proven. Now it was time for the conclusion. Her assistant, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman named Zara, sat opposite her, a tablet glowing in her hands. Zara had been with Aaliyah since the beginning, and she understood her boss's moods better than anyone. She saw the look in Aaliyah's eyes, a familiar, focused intensity that always preceded a major move. "It's time," Aaliyah said, her voice low and steady. It was not a question. It was a declaration. Zara nodded, her fingers already flying across the screen of her tablet. "I'm on it." "Summon the board," Aaliyah instructed. "I want an emergency session, here, in 1 hour and 45 minutes. Inform them the agenda is a critical brand integrity issue." A list of names appeared on Zara's screen, the top executives of Brooks Atelier. The chief financial officer, the head of global marketing, the chief operating officer, these were some of the most powerful people in the fashion industry. A few taps on the screen, and secure, encrypted messages were dispatched. Cars were summoned, flights were diverted. When Aaliyah Brooks called an emergency meeting, the world rearranged itself to accommodate. "Next," Aaliyah continued, her gaze fixed on the distant lights of the wedding venue. "Contact the Carter family's legal counsel. Don't go through our usual channels. I want you to call Marcus Thorne directly. He's the head of our acquisitions division." Zara's eyes widened slightly. Marcus Thorne was a shark, a legendary corporate lawyer brought in for hostile takeovers and brutal contract negotiations, not for routine legal matters. This was an escalation far beyond what she had imagined. "Tell Marcus to bring the full termination suite for the Carter Enterprises partnership. And I want him to have the moral turpitude clause highlighted." Brooks Atelier had a multi-million-dollar contract with Carter Enterprises, a luxury hotel chain, to supply their high-end suites with exclusive bathrobes and linens. The moral turpitude clause was a standard but rarely used part of the contract that allowed for immediate termination if a key executive brought the partner brand into disrepute. It was a corporate nuclear option. "And Zara," Aaliyah added, a new layer of cold steel in her voice. "Contact our PR team, the A-team. Tell them to get to the venue. I want a statement drafted. No, two statements. One for the industry press, one for the mainstream media. I want them ready to go live the second I give the word." Within minutes, Aaliyah's commands had set off a chain reaction across the city and beyond. In quiet suburban homes, executives excused themselves from dinner tables, their phones buzzing with urgent, coded messages. In a high-rise law office downtown, Marcus Thorne pulled a dusty but critical file from a locked cabinet. In a sleek media relations firm, a team of publicists began furiously typing, crafting the story that would soon dominate the news cycle. A convoy began to form. A fleet of black luxury sedans, their interiors filled with the architects of Aaliyah's empire, started moving through the city streets. They converged from different directions, all heading for the same destination, the grand, idyllic venue where Madison Carter was still celebrating her supposed triumph. Madison's wedding was indeed about to become the most talked-about event in America. She had craved the spotlight, dreamed of seeing her face on the cover of magazines. She was about to get her wish. But she wouldn't be celebrated as a society bride. She would be remembered as a cautionary tale. The wheels of justice, in this case, were attached to a fleet of very expensive, very fast-moving cars, and they were heading straight for her. The reception was in full, glorious swing. The band was playing a lively tune, the dance floor was packed, and the champagne was flowing like a river. Madison and Chase were in the middle of it all, performing their first dance as husband and wife. For a moment, the ugliness from earlier seemed to be forgotten, washed away by the tide of celebration. It was then that the first car arrived. A sleek black Rolls-Royce. It pulled up to the main entrance with a silent, imposing grace. The valet, accustomed to seeing expensive vehicles, felt a knot of apprehension. This was different. This felt official. Before he could even move, a second car, a black Mercedes Maybach, pulled in behind it. Then a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, a convoy of black luxury cars, their tinted windows reflecting the festive lights of the party, had formed a silent, intimidating blockade at the entrance. The music on the dance floor faltered as guests began to turn their heads, their curiosity piqued. Security guards stiffened, their hands instinctively moving toward their earpieces, murmuring to each other. Who were these people? They weren't on the guest list. The car doors opened in near-perfect unison. From them emerged a group of men and women who radiated an aura of absolute power. They were dressed in sharp, dark, impeccably tailored suits. Their faces were grim, their movements purposeful. They looked less like wedding guests and more like a delegation arriving to negotiate the surrender of a small country. Then the door of the Rolls-Royce opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a black pantsuit that seemed to absorb the light around her. She moved to the center of the group, and they instinctively formed a protective phalanx around her. It was Aaliyah Brooks. But this was not the maid from earlier. This was a queen arriving with her court. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders. Her face was set in a look of calm, unshakable resolve. She was no longer invisible. She was the most powerful person on the property, and everyone could feel it. Inside, on the dance floor, Madison and Chase had stopped dancing. "Who is that?" Madison whispered, her brow furrowed in annoyance at the interruption. Liam Turner, standing near the edge of the dance floor, saw her. His jaw dropped. The calm, dignified woman he had seen being thrown out was back, and she had brought an army. He understood now, the patient look in her eyes, the quiet confidence. It all clicked into place with a terrifying clarity. The maitre d', a man who had been in the high-end hospitality business for 30 years and thought he had seen everything, approached Madison, his face ashen. He had been given his instructions by one of the newcomers, a woman with an earpiece and a gaze that could cut glass. "Mrs. Reynolds," the maitre d' said, his voice trembling slightly. Madison shot him an irritated look. "What is it? Can't you see I'm in the middle of my first dance?" "My apologies, ma'am," he stammered. "But there are some people here to see you. Ms. Brooks would like a word." Madison's face contorted in a mask of confusion and rage. "Brooks? What are you talking about?" Who the hell is Miss Brooks? She squinted toward the entrance, trying to get a better look at the woman at the center of the commotion. A flicker of recognition sparked in her eyes, followed by a wave of disbelief. She let out a short, nervous laugh. Are you kidding me? The maid? You interrupted my wedding because the maid came back. Get security. Have her arrested for trespassing this time. The maitre d' swallowed hard, the color draining completely from his face. He looked like a man who had been asked to deliver a death sentence. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. No, ma'am. Not the maid. He took a deep, shaky breath. Ms. Aaliyah Brooks, the woman who designed your gown. And, according to the gentleman with her, the woman whose company owns half the couture brands being worn here tonight. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The music stopped completely. A profound, echoing silence fell over the entire reception. Madison's nervous laugh died in her throat. Her perfectly painted smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her eyes locked on the figure at the entrance, and finally, she saw her. Not the maid, not the background furniture. She saw the billionaire, and she felt the first chilling touch of absolute dread. The transition was swift and brutal. One moment, Madison was the bride at the center of a fairy tale wedding. The next, she, her new husband Chase, and her parents, Charles and Eleanor Carter, were being silently escorted away from the stunned guests and into a private dining room that had been commandeered for a purpose far more serious than celebrating. The room, which had been set up for a quiet, intimate dinner, had been transformed. The floral centerpiece was gone. In its place, a long mahogany table had been cleared. Laptops were open. Legal documents were laid out in neat, menacing stacks. It no longer felt like a part of a wedding venue. It felt like a corporate boardroom, a place where fortunes were made and lost. The executives from the black cars were already there, seated around the table. They were silent, their faces impassive, their eyes cold. Liam Turner was there too, standing quietly in a corner. One of Aaliyah's assistants had found him and simply said, "Ms. Brooks requests your presence." He had no idea why, but he had followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The Carter family and Chase were ushered to one side of the table, left to stand awkwardly like defendants in a courtroom. A moment later, Aaliyah Brooks entered. She moved with a silent, commanding grace, her presence filling the room, sucking the air out of it. She took her place at the head of the table, not sitting but standing, looking down at the family that had, for generations, looked down on everyone else. Madison's mind was reeling, struggling to process the impossible reality in front of her. The same woman she had mocked, the same woman she had ordered thrown out like a piece of trash, was now standing before her, radiating an aura of power that made her own wealth feel like pocket change. Her mouth opened, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. She finally managed to form words, a strangled, disbelieving whisper. You're the maid." Aaliyah's expression did not change. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, measured, and utterly devastating. "I was a maid for a few hours this evening, yes," she said, her eyes locking onto Madison's. "Today, however, I am the majority shareholder and CEO of Brooks Atelier." She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "And I am the woman whose executive board is currently reviewing whether your family, or any of your associated businesses, will ever be permitted to wear or purchase one of our designs again, effective immediately." Madison went completely pale. It was as if all the blood had drained from her body, leaving behind a waxy, terrified shell. Her father, Charles Carter, a man used to being the most powerful person in any room, finally found his voice. It was blustering, defensive. "Now, see here," he sputtered, stepping forward. "There has clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. My daughter, she was just... It was the champagne, the excitement of the day." Aaliyah held up a single, elegant hand. And Charles Carter fell silent. "There has been no misunderstanding, Mr. Carter. There has been a moment of perfect, unadulterated clarity." She gestured toward Liam in the corner. "Mr. Turner, if you would." Liam, his hands trembling slightly, stepped forward and placed the small thumb drive on the table. One of Aaliyah's team members inserted it into a laptop, and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was the security footage. The entire room watched in horrified silence as the scene from earlier played out in crystal-clear high definition. They saw Madison sneer. They heard her mock Aaliyah's accent. They heard her call her background furniture. They saw her shrieking at security, demanding Aaliyah be thrown out. They heard the final cruel shout, "Run along before someone mistakes you for a guest." The audio was pristine. There was no room for denial. It was all there. A permanent digital record of Madison's cruelty. When the video ended, the silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Aaliyah then placed the handwritten witness statements on the table, fanning them out like a winning poker hand. "And this is the corroborating testimony from the staff members you so casually dismissed." Madison stared at the evidence, her mouth agape. There was no escape, no explanation, no way to spin this. She was trapped by her own ugliness. "This is a private matter," Charles Carter blustered, his face turning a blotchy red. "You have no right." A man in a sharp suit at the end of the table cleared his throat. It was Marcus Thorne, the shark. "On the contrary, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "When the public face of a family that holds a multi-million-dollar partnership with our brand engages in behavior that brings public ridicule and scorn, it ceases to be a private matter. It becomes a direct violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of your contract with Brooks Atelier, the moral turpitude clause." The legal jargon was a death knell. Madison finally looked at her husband, Chase, her eyes pleading for help, for him to do something, say something. But Chase was just staring at her, a look of dawning horror on his face. He wasn't seeing his beautiful, powerful bride. He was seeing a cruel, spoiled child, a liability he had just legally bound himself to. In that moment, he saw their entire future, not as a glamorous partnership, but as a long, exhausting exercise in damage control. And he said nothing. The hammer fell. It didn't come with a loud crash, but with the quiet, devastating finality of Aaliyah Brooks's voice. She stood at the head of the table, a judge delivering a sentence that had been decades in the making. Her gaze swept over the crumbling facades of the Carter family. She saw Charles, his blustering rage deflating into a look of panicked disbelief. She saw Eleanor, her face a frozen mask of socialite horror. And she saw Madison, the princess in her $60,000 gown, now looking like a girl playing dress-up in her mother's clothes, small and utterly broken. "Therefore," Aaliyah announced, her voice resonating with absolute authority, "effective immediately, Brooks Atelier is terminating all contracts and partnerships with Carter Enterprises. Our legal team will be in contact with yours tomorrow morning to finalize the dissolution." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow. The partnership was worth tens of millions of dollars to the Carter Hotel empire. It was more than just a revenue stream. It was a mark of prestige, a symbol of their place at the pinnacle of luxury. Losing it was a catastrophic financial and reputational blow. Charles Carter swayed on his feet, looking as if he might collapse. "You can't do this," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "This will ruin us." "You," Aaliyah corrected him, her voice devoid of any pity, "did this to yourselves. This is merely the consequence." She then turned her attention directly to Madison, who was now trembling, tears silently streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Furthermore," Aaliyah continued, her tone becoming even colder, "the gown you are wearing, along with the entire custom collection designed for your bridal party, will be permanently pulled from all future Brooks Atelier campaigns. It will be archived as a legacy design, never to be produced or promoted again. We will be issuing a press release to that effect tonight." This was not about money. This was about legacy. Madison had dreamed of her wedding photos gracing the pages of fashion magazines, of her gown becoming an iconic sought-after design. Instead, it would now be a symbol of shame, a footnote in a story of public disgrace, the ultimate humiliation. Reporters from several major news outlets have already been alerted to an unfolding story regarding a major brand partnership dissolution, one of Aaliyah's PR team members added quietly, checking her phone. They are currently gathered outside the main gates. Madison let out a choked sob and finally collapsed into a chair, her beautiful, expensive dress pooling around her like a shroud. The fairy tale was over. The castle was crumbling. The princess had been dethroned in a small, private room, away from the twinkling lights. But the news of her fall was about to echo around the world. Chase, her husband of only a few hours, stared at his new wife. The woman he had married, the glamorous, powerful heiress, had vanished. In her place was this weeping, defeated person who had single-handedly torpedoed her family's fortune and their social standing, all for the fleeting pleasure of bullying someone she thought was helpless. He felt a profound sense of dread. The name Reynolds was now inextricably linked to the name Carter, and the Carter name was about to become toxic. Outside the room, the party had died. The guests were whispering, their phones out, scrolling through social media as the first rumors began to break. The band had packed up their instruments. The catering staff moved with a quiet, vindicated purpose, clearing away the remnants of a celebration that had curdled into a disaster. The phones were recording everything, every hushed conversation, every panicked glance, every member of the Carter family being sequestered away. The once arrogant bride, the queen of the evening, was now the subject of a story that would define her for the rest of her life. And she had written every single word of it herself. In the midst of the Carter family's complete and utter collapse, Aaliyah Brooks shifted her focus. Her work with them was done. Justice, swift and decisive, had been delivered. Now there was another matter to attend to. She turned her gaze to the corner of the room where Liam Turner had been standing, a silent, nerve-wracked witness to the entire proceeding. Liam felt her eyes on him, and his heart leaped into his throat. He had just watched a corporate dynasty get dismantled. He was just a junior planner who had copied some security footage. He braced himself, unsure of what was coming next. Aaliyah walked toward him, her expression softening slightly. The icy commander was replaced by a thoughtful, discerning leader. She stopped a few feet in front of him. The room was silent, save for Madison's quiet, heartbroken sobs. "Mr. Turner," Aaliyah said, her voice clear and strong, "you don't know me. You had no reason to believe that what you were witnessing would ever have consequences for anyone but yourself. You had a choice tonight. The easy choice was to stay silent, to protect your job, to look the other way." Liam swallowed hard, unable to speak. He could only nod. "You could have done that," Aaliyah continued. "No one would have blamed you. It would have been the sensible, self-preserving thing to do, but you didn't. You saw an injustice, a small one in the grand scheme of things, perhaps, but you refused to let it pass undocumented. You chose integrity when silence was easier." She paused, her gaze appreciative. That quality, that willingness to do the right thing when no one is watching, and when it comes at a personal risk, is rare. It is also incredibly valuable. In front of the ruined Carters, the stunned Chase, and her entire executive board, Aaliyah made him an offer that would change his life forever. "I am creating a new position at Brooks Atelier," she announced. "Head of Global Events. It will be a demanding role, responsible for overseeing all of our major brand showcases, from Paris Fashion Week to our annual charity gala in New York. It requires precision, dedication, and above all, unimpeachable character." She looked him directly in the eye. "The position is yours, Mr. Turner, if you want it." Liam's mind went blank. The words didn't compute. Head of Global Events for Brooks Atelier? It was a dream job, a position that people worked their entire lives for and never achieved. He had been worried about getting fired from his junior assistant role, and now he was being offered a seat at the top of the industry. His eyes welled with tears. The shame and fear he had felt all night were washed away by a wave of overwhelming gratitude. He finally found his voice, though it was thick with emotion. "Yes," he stammered. "Yes, of course. Thank you. I... I don't know what to say." "Say you'll start on Monday," Aaliyah said with a small, genuine smile. "My office will be in touch with a formal offer. Welcome to the team." Madison watched this exchange from her chair, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The maid she had mocked, the woman she had tried to destroy, was not only dismantling her entire world, but was now elevating a simple event planner to a position of immense power and prestige. She was rewarding the very person who had helped document her downfall. It was the final, crushing blow. Aaliyah had not just punished the wicked. She had rewarded the righteous. The lesson was brutal and clear. The world did not belong to bullies. It belonged to those with character. As Aaliyah and her team prepared to leave, Liam stood straighter, a newfound confidence settling over him. He had taken a risk, a gamble on his own conscience, and it had paid off in a way he could never have imagined. He had walked into this wedding a nervous junior planner. He was walking out a future executive, his life irrevocably changed by a single decent choice. The aftermath of the Reynolds-Carter wedding was not just a ripple in the high society pond. It was a tidal wave. In the weeks that followed, Madison's story became a viral sensation, a modern-day fable of hubris and comeuppance. The security footage Liam had saved was inevitably leaked, and the clip of Madison verbally abusing Aaliyah played on a loop on news channels and social media feeds across the globe. She became a meme, a symbol of entitled arrogance. The hashtag Billionaire trended for days. The fallout was swift and merciless. The cover story in Society Bride was pulled. Brands that had sponsorship deals with her, from luxury car companies to perfume lines, scrambled to cut ties, issuing public statements condemning her behavior. The exclusive country club the Carters had belonged to for generations quietly suspended their membership, citing a violation of their code of conduct. The wedding, which was meant to be her grand launch into the upper echelon of society, became the event that marked her public excommunication. She became a pariah, a social leper. Friends stopped returning her calls. Invitations dried up. Chase, her new husband, grew distant, his days consumed by damage control meetings with his own family's lawyers, trying to untangle their pristine reputation from the toxic Carter name. The marriage, built on a foundation of wealth and status, began to crumble under the weight of the scandal. But Aaliyah Brooks was not focused on Madison's downfall. Her purpose had not been to destroy one woman, but to make a statement about the value of all people. She turned her attention and her considerable resources toward a more constructive end. In a widely publicized announcement, she launched the Eleanora Brooks Foundation, named after her mother. Its mission was to provide full scholarships for young women from working-class families who dreamed of studying fashion, design, and business. The initial endowment was a staggering $50 million. In her speech at the foundation's launch, Aaliyah stood before a crowd of reporters, not in a power suit but in a simple, elegant dress. She spoke of her mother, a housekeeper who had taught her the meaning of hard work and dignity. She spoke of the invisible people who make the world run, the ones who clean the floors, serve the food, and polish the silver. "Power," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "is not proven by how you treat the people who are above you. It is not demonstrated by the names you know or the titles you hold. True power, true character, is revealed in only one way: by how you treat those you believe are beneath you." Her words were printed in newspapers and shared across the internet, a powerful counter-narrative to the story of Madison's fall. Aaliyah's legacy would not be one of revenge, but of empowerment. She had used her platform not just to tear down an old, corrupt system of entitlement, but to build a new ladder for those who were so often told they didn't belong. Because one day, the maid you mock, the person you dismiss, the individual you deem invisible, may just be the billionaire who owns your world. They may be the one who holds the keys to the kingdom you thought was yours alone. Status is revealed not by wealth or titles, but by how you treat those with none. Because those you dismiss today may hold your destiny tomorrow. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.